This is the Final Word Cricket Podcast Season 16, Episode 33. We're recording this on Monday, the 19th of August. I'm Adam Collins and I'm in Edinburgh. I've just gotten to Waverley Station about, 15 minutes ago. And the first thing I've done upon arriving in town is connect up with Daniel Norcross, who is in his office in London, to talk about the weight of the world. Hello to you, Daniel.
Hello, Adam. Yeah, it's the 19th of August. So when you said that, those were quite chilling words for me. The beginning of August is good. I'm okay. I don't feel the kind of harsh winds of apricity rushing through my bones, but I know that at some point in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be sat outside in a pub garden having a smoke on a day that was quite warm, and suddenly at around about 8 o'clock, 8:15, it's going to feel a little chilly, and I know it's going to be a harbinger of doom. So
you're going to require a jacket at some point. I mean, I brought one with me because obviously the climate being different further up north. I think it's maximum temperatures of 17 each day here. A bit different to how it felt the last time we were in Edinburgh for the half marathon in May. It was wet that week too, but that's the start of something, isn't it? The May bank holiday weekend. It's what's ahead of you, and what you're describing is the other side of the hill. Although we still have 3 test matches to play it in the UK. You'll be going up to Manchester tomorrow. We'll come to that in a little bit, and so much more. It's been a really busy week throughout the course of it in international cricket, domestic cricket as well. Mentioned here the home away from home for the Final Word. It's our 4th trip here in the space of about, I guess it's 14 months with the podcast. We've got a touring party of 7 plus a few locals here in Edinburgh who'll be playing 3 games of cricket in 3 days. We've got one tonight against the eccentric Flamingos. I always get that wrong. And tomorrow we're playing at Watsonian, which was the club where Kim Hughes made a record number of runs when he played up here as a pro in the early 70s. So Johnny Potton's organised that. The great Abs has organised the Flamingos game as we played last year. Got Sean McGivern up here, who, Daniel, you know well from our Nerd Pledge CSI sleuth group that's always talking. Ed Edgecombe as well, another one of our Edinburgh crew. Who's kindly put me and my family up the last couple of times we've been here for the marathon. But touring party, Dan Price, his second name check in the pod in as many weeks, who'll be keeping wicket. Max Dighton, who's been away with us a few times now. Ollie Bellwood, who made 92 on Saturday before rocking up to my birthday and telling everyone about it. Phil Meng, who was the man who invented Nerd Pledge, who he's decided to come up. Yeah, he's the guy that put in the 222, the 2 for 22, the Richie Benno number that got us all going in 2019. So he'll be playing in the Final Word baggy blue for the first time, having played in the Aussie version of the team a little bit. And Tom Cooper and Will Day have been 2 other great tourists and always contribute to the sides that we field when in the UK. So looking forward to all of that. This is where the Australian team will be in a fortnight as well, Daniel, when they play. I think they've got 3 T20s in the space of 5 or 6 days. So I'll endeavour to do some, Scotland adjacent work while we're here. I'll try and get Trudy Lindblane, who's the new chief executive of Cricket Scotland. She has a Australian Cricket Australia background and worked in cycling before taking on this job. Last year we did a Scotland special with the acting CEO, Pete Fitzboyden, which went really well because, as I'm sure you're aware, Daniel, there's been lots of off-field stuff going on in Cricket Scotland over the last few years, but they've got a good story to tell on-field with what their men achieved at the T20 World Cup. Their women making the World Cup. It'll be maybe in Bangladesh, but maybe somewhere else. That's going to be part of our conversation today as well. So that's the week in Final Word land. If you like what we do, by the way, we make this feed for free. Of course we do. But if you want to support the show, Patrons, where all of this comes together. We've got the game on the 20th of September at Dulwich against the Oval Dream Boys, which is all organised through the Discord channel. You get access to that when you become a patron. You help us stay independent. You let us do things like make Nerd Pledge. 198 of them we've now made. Daniel, you made Nerd Pledge 197 a couple of weeks ago with Jeff and clearly enjoyed yourself. And the ad-free feed as well. Sorry, you please go.
I had an enormous amount of fun doing that one because I didn't know much about Graham. I've even almost forgotten his name now. Watson.
Yes.
I sort of because he kind of retired just as I was really getting into cricket, but because he had played in my first year of watching, sort of like in 1976.
Yeah.
So I'd become very aware of him when I was doing dice cricket and inventing teams. So he would make his way in there, especially because there was a bit of the old Packer stuff. And it was kind of a weird thing to see his haircut and go, oh my God. It brought back a kind of really strange nostalgic frisson for the mid-1970s. And to discover that he was a man who played the ball invariably with his head tickled me enormously. Yeah, I had great fun doing that. Just quickly on Scotland, their cricket is in extraordinary good shape at the moment. I mean, there's an argument for saying, I think, that they're in better shape than Ireland. Both their women, who did qualify for the World Cup, and Ireland's women didn't, although Ireland's women we will come to because they're having something of a purple patch at the moment. But also watching them in the World Cup, I thought the T20 World Cup, men's T20 World Cup. And I don't know if it's got something to do with them not being a test-playing nation, kind of perversely. Maybe that's sort of helping. Maybe it makes no difference at all. Maybe it's just a good group of players and coaches around at the same time. But, you know, they're a really good team to watch. And in that T20 World Cup, they were unlucky. They were in a tough group, and they very nearly got through anyway. So
they very nearly beat Australia to get their way through. There was all that chat about Australia bringing them through with them, a little bit like what Australia tried to do with the West Indies in 1999. But they were only what turned out to be an over or two away from knocking off Australia and had the better of that game for the most of it. So, yeah, there is an interesting conversation around full member status. They're pretty close to marking every box you need to do. I think they've got to win 2 more games against full member nations. The women making the World Cup is 1 box checked. What they did in the last T20 World Cups helped along the way. Those 3 T20s against Australia, if they nab one of them, I think they've got Zimbabwe coming up as well this summer. Towards the end of it, they're within touching distance, within spitting distance of being eligible to become a full member. The question becomes then, will they put the resources in to do it? Because in the absence of a roadmap that's a little bit more robust than Ireland's, they could find themselves with similar growing pains to what Ireland have experienced in the last 5 years since they became a full member. And a lot of that's no fault of their own. It's the structural impediments and guardrails around you when you are a full member.
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed this before, haven't we? But, you know, maybe having a sort of like a nice period after you become full member where your players can play as non-overseas in England would be helpful. You know, we've had that sort of discussion. But just on the subject of Zimbabwe, because you just reminded me of something, and they are a full member nation, of course, and they've got every chance of being beaten by Scotland. Because were you on the Surrey live stream with me when I was feeling particularly mean about Middlesex? Because you know what it's like when we're on the Surrey live stream. I'm basically allowed to be the worst version of myself.
Yeah, well, I mean, you framing it as though it's an unusual thing for you to be particularly mean about Middlesex. That's your standard persona on there. So what was the reference point here, though?
Well, I think you might not have been in that day, but it occurred to me that Middlesex were epically terrible at T20 cricket. But, you know, like, as is the way of these things, you have a feeling, but you'd love the numbers to back it up. So we had the quite brilliant Andrew Sampson next to us, and I said to him, I gave him some pointers, if you like. I said, can you get me all of the teams in the history of cricket that have played more than, and I think I started with 100 T20s. So that could be, you know, Kolkata Knight Riders, all of the counties, because they've all played them, you know, because it started back in 2003, whatever it was. And of course, there's a whole load of CPL teams and others, and obviously in Australia, who have played over 100. And actually, I think it was, if you take it all the way back to about 65 matches, the team with the very, very worst record in T20, as in win-loss ratio, is Zimbabwe. And second is Middlesex.
Well, they've had Durham Zimbabwe playing in. Well, Durham's been playing in the domestic Zimbabwe T20 comp as recently as this winter. Maybe Middlesex should join that tournament as their pre-season comp this year and bring the threads together.
Yeah,
perhaps.
There's good reasons for it for Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe, being full member nation, play a lot of their T20 cricket against very good teams.
Yeah.
Whereas the weirdity of Middlesex is that they're part of a county system that has got a lot of other counties that are quite impoverished, like Derbyshire and Northants and Leicestershire and what have you. And yet they singularly meet all the criteria for awfulness and bested only by Zimbabwe. So I mentioned that to get a gratuitous dig at Middlesex, but also to point out that Scotland have got every chance of registering a win against another full member nation.
So yes, the Scotland trip, it's a bit of a gift to myself in a way as well. When I saw in the schedule this was possible to come up to the Fringe and see a bunch of shows, and what will be 4 days of cricket in a row for me, because I'm playing an MCC game on the way back in Doncaster on Thursday, then teaming up with the Surrey live stream Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But had the 40th on Saturday night, which you were present for throughout. A lot of my teammates from Oval Dream Boys were as well, and they got defeated for the first time this season on Sunday, which I don't think's unrelated.
No, well, do you know, the night before had been a heavy one for a different reason for me, and I've discovered that hair of the dog is the only way to get better. But the way you've got to do it is to just slightly reduce from the excesses of the day before. So if you've had like 3 bottles of white wine one night, take it down to 2.5 the next. Then I was sort of like down to sort of 2 last night, and it's a very sophisticated detoxification methodology. But it was a lovely party, and the cake was immense.
It was
huge. What a thing it was! A thing of unbelievable beauty.
Well looked after. I didn't get any cake, nor do they have any of the pizza, because that's the nature of the beast. When it's your birthday, you just kind of circulate for the duration of the evening, and you don't eat anything, and that can be an impediment. But no, didn't play yesterday. Lots of cricket this week. Speaking of milestones, though, 2 things. I mentioned Jason Dunstall's 60th birthday last week. Dermot Brereton's today. How can I miss that? The other great Hawthorn legend of that era in that forward line. But also today, Charlie Reynolds, who we saw on Saturday night, tells me that it's 10 years since Ian Botham took that photograph of himself, of his cock to be precise, and tweeted it. And the only reason I reference that is that there's so much conversation right now about the platform Twitter, but I find myself feeling nostalgic about it. And I suppose I thought you would too, because if not for Twitter, I mean, think about your Test match sofa days and think about the way you were able to corral that community and to develop a following. And the same applies for Jeff and me in the final word. It is quite sad that, I think about the Botham Day and, I don't know, the Elite Honesty Day, when that photograph from the Australian dressing room and Langer took over appeared on Twitter and
and also there was like non-cricket races, like the Wild Hog Day, whatever that day was. You remember the crazy hogs?
I don't know if I remember that, but I'll take your word for it.
That was a beauty. And then
Ed Balls Day, of course, that's
Ed
one
Balls
of the early.
Day, yeah.
Ed Balls Day. There have been some good times on there. The Scapegoat Day with David Warner's brother saying that Warner's always the scapegoat. That's one that I remember from around the same time as the Botham picture. But, it might well be that we're all kicked off there eventually, or all, or people actively all leave in a block or something like that.
Well,
I don't know whether
I haven't, but I've started. I've made the tentative steps. It's a little bit like, when you've got a job that you're going to leave, so you're starting to look around and explore. And so I've gone to Blue Sky.
Have you?
And it just is a thing, Colo, that because I still have to do Twitter, because that's where all the cricket journalists are, literally all of them, right? And on Blue Sky, there's, I would say, literally none of them. If you look for Nick Holt or Ali Martin or Bretto, or actually you guys, Jeff's gone over there, but he doesn't, tweet, doesn't, whatever you want to call it, whatever you do on a Blue Sky post, I suppose. So it's an issue. So I won't be able to leave Twitter. I won't be able to flounce off in a rage and go, that's it, I'm done. But it is definitely a thing I've noticed that in the last few months particularly, if you go on Twitter to try and get your sort of usual morning fix of the cricket news that you need, because that's what I really use it for, cricket and politics. The politicos are still there, the cricket people are still there, but my feed is absolutely jam-packed with, and I don't know whether this was my fault, because I decided I didn't want to live in an echo chamber about 9 months ago, so I judiciously followed a couple of people who are, it turns out, batshit crazy, but are broadly speaking on the mainstream of the right. So the result has been just a feed that's absolutely filled with anger, bile, and invective. I keep on being told I'm living in a communist country because Keir Starmer has stopped some riots, which is quite hard to go. So I went to Blue Sky just to see what it was like. And it's like old Twitter. It's like cats and people being supportive. And there are some cricket fans there. There's a bit of the not so much of the cricket writers, but the fans and people who love things. And there's a lot of nice positivity and, I don't know what you'd call it, sort of whimsical pleasure.
I think the
So
challenge.
I'm afraid I'm going to do more and more of it over there, I think.
Yeah, and look, if everyone moved over, the challenge is going to be the amplification bit, right? Because it'll take you a decade or more to develop the same following that you have on Twitter. I'm not saying that's everything. Following isn't everything, far from it. But the ability to, I guess, share work, and it's tricky. There's no easy answer. Anyway, just sort of referenced that because of the beefy pick, and it got me thinking, of you really, because the Test Match Chauffeur and what a huge part of that Twitter story on
program.
cricket. It did. Clearly, it did.
It made the program because when we started in 2009-10, the only way to get hold of us was to email, which was okay, but it was kind of clunky. And then suddenly we alighted on Twitter. And I mean, to a degree, occasionally we probably overdid it because we would take everyone's tweets. And because everybody liked to hear their tweets, then in between balls, you were firing off 3 or 4 different tweets. But it was a joyful place to be because people were just filled with, I guess, the fun of being able to communicate in real time what they were experiencing at that moment. And it helped to create the characters in the program as well, and obviously to amplify Test Match. So as it has done for so many people subsequently, like White Line must have had exactly the same kind of impact.
Well, in my former life as well in politics, I remember when there was the Twitter revolution. It was around there was a party room spill for the opposition in 2009. So we were in government and the opposition had a meltdown and sacked their leader kind of from nowhere, but it was mostly a Twitter-driven thing because for the first time you could fuck people over in real time. You didn't need to wait for the newspapers to come out, you know what I mean? That's how they were behaving anyway. So anyway, long time ago now, you'll be able to communicate with our audience in near real time as you look at your phone and put it down the screen. What's the go here, Daniel? What are you doing?
Well, you may have noticed that my Twitter app is still the Twitter app.
Oh, that's good. You've not updated it. You've not done the X thing.
No. So what I do is I manually update every single one of my other apps rather than hit update all.
That is commitment. That is commitment to
Twitter on my phone.
Commitment to the cause. You're going to Manchester tomorrow. That will be Tuesday. The Test Match starts on Wednesday. The daily eps will be Cam with you and with a little bit of Vish thrown in there as well, I believe. I saw Vish at our railway station this morning when the tube wasn't up. We were both on the other station. And he said he'll do a couple of eps. So when I'm off doing Surrey stuff with others this week, so that'll be nice to have that ticking over. We've got some, as England like to do, as is their want these days, they've named their 11 45 hours before the first ball set to be bowled. So Dan Lawrence opening. Surrey's number 3 will open for England, having not played a Test match in a couple of years, not one in the Bazball era. Ben Duckett with him because, of course, Crawley broke his finger. Ollie Pope at 3, the new England captain. I'll come to you on that in a sec. Joe Root at 4, who I wonder whether they considered making the England captain on a temporary basis. Harry Brook now vice-captain at 5. Jamie Smith elevated to 6. Then Wokes at 7. Atkinson 8. Matty Potts gets a recall at 9. Mark Wood at 10. Shah Bashir at number 11. So different balance to the team. Wokes elevated up to number 7, playing the 6 specialist bats, including Jamie Smith at 6. They don't find room for Cox as we thought they might at the top of the list. We thought it was going to go that way. Potts gets a crack, and as I say before, Ollie Pope is going to be the captain, having been promoted from vice-captain. But as we pointed out on the show last week, I'm sure Stokes will be there and thereabouts, having done that hamstring. I don't expect he'll take his hands off the levers entirely. But, yeah, you're thinking on the leadership and on the balance of this England team as they start their new 3-match series against Sri Lanka on Wednesday at Old Trafford.
Well, first on the balance, I was quite interested in this. I thought that they would go this way, to be honest with you. I didn't think that they'd bring Cox in because it is a bit problematic to go in with 3 seamers and a very young spinner and a very inexperienced captain. But I wondered whether Old Trafford, they might just go for it on the basis that Old Trafford's got a reputation for taking spin. And with Dan Lawrence and Joe Root also in the side, then they might have thought to themselves, well, do you know, those 2 extra bowlers kind of make 1 extra bowler, if you like. They make a kind of 5th bowler with the balance that they might have liked for Old Trafford especially. But you wouldn't be able to do that at the Oval and Lords, I don't think, because I just don't see that would work. So I wasn't surprised that they brought in Potts. I'm surprised. I'll be very surprised if Potts bats at 9 and Atkinson at 8, personally. I think they'll flip that because Potts has scored over 300 runs this season, an average of 40-odd, and he got 149 not out in a championship game. I do think that what they're saying is that Chris Wokes is better than a 7. He's like a 6.8. And I think Potts is better than an 8. He's like a 7.9. And sort of between them, they think that gives them enough strength in their batting order. I do pose the question, would they do that if they were 1-0 down in a series against Australia or India? I'm not sure that they would, to be honest. Similarly, I'm not sure that they wouldn't have brought in a specialist opener if they found themselves 1-0 down against Australia in the Ashes and Zach Crawley breaks his finger. I think it's really tough on Keaton Jennings, who's scored a lot of runs over the last few seasons, had a really good lick. And whatever you think about the 100 doesn't really matter. If you watch Keaton Jennings playing in the 100, he plays some extraordinary shots. He's got flicks and ramps and scoops that I didn't know he had in him. But he's obviously broadened his repertoire of strokes in an attempt to catch the eye of the selectors, and it hasn't worked. But back to the second question, the subsidiary question of Ollie Pope, I am vexed by it. I can't work out how he's going to go for this reason, that he's a very intelligent thinking cricketer, and he has captained sides, not red ball sides particularly, but he has captained sides, and he's watched a lot of what Stokes does. But I think because Stokes is such an eccentric and funky captain, in that he can be incredibly orthodox on occasion, usually in the second innings when they're bowling, less in the first. But he's always looking to make a play. He's always looking to take wickets. Whether Pope will feel that he has to captain in that image because that's what the team does. And, I've seldom seen a team so defined by their captain and their manager, if you like, in the way that this team is, the McCullum-Stokes team. It is defined by that relationship. And so Pope, I don't know whether he'll feel he's auditioning and therefore has to stick with the program, or whether he will take the opposite way, which is, well, I'd say it might not be opposite, it might just be complementary, which is people say you've got to be your own man. All the time they say you've got to be your own man, whether it be in broadcasting or playing cricket. You can't copy other people. You've got to be what you are. Temperamentally, I think he'll be fine, but I'm going to be fascinated to watch how he behaves tactically. I'll be interested to see if he gets as impatient with not having a wicket for, sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes. But if Stokes isn't getting what he wants, then something changes and things shift about. And I'll also be fascinated to see how he handles Shoaib Bashir, because Stokes' handling of spinners has been one of the truly remarkable aspects of his captaincy, especially English spinners who have not been very experienced, in whom he's shown an awful lot of faith, and the fields he set for them. Is there a template that Pope follows there? I wonder. There may be. I'm going to be really interested to see. I'm not surprised he didn't go to route, though. I think that once you've made Pope vice captain, this team is all about showing faith in people. They're selected for what they're doing, which is why Dan Lawrence, after we think a record 17 matches carrying the drinks in a row, 17 matches as spare batter, it was almost like they said, I know it's an opener, but no, we can't have you carrying the drinks again.
No.
You just open, Dan, just open.
It would have been cruel. It would have been cruel had they promoted ahead of him, especially with the way it played out with Crawley. Yeah. And look, it's not. Phil Walker spoke well on this topic on the Wisdom podcast a couple of weeks ago around the Lawrence promotion to opening, and he's the Lawrence whisperer of sorts, Phil. That does he think it will work? Probably not, but he needs to be given a chance to fail in the position, given it's the one that's vacant, and he has to be given a chance here. It wouldn't have been procedurally fair or reasonable to have given someone else the crack. Just on Pope, I do ponder, like, with timings and all the rest of it, this might actually feed into our next topic. And by the way, we're going to do more of the England-Sri Lanka stuff within the daily show, so we're not going to go into any real depth in terms of previewing it today because it would have such a short shelf life. The one thing I will say about Sri Lanka is that Narushan Dickwella, who has been a player we've taken a lot of interest in over the years, has been suspended from all forms of cricket because of an anti-doping violation. It relates to the LPL, the Lanka Premier League, where he was captain of the Gaul Marvels. I'm not even sure the LPL exists anymore, by the way, but Dickwella, who is usually raised in the context of Storytime being the man with the most Test 50s without ever having made 100, 22 half-centuries and 0 centuries. He is not part of this troop, and I guess we're lesser for it, but it is because he's been done for some kind of banned substance. Anyway, that's a fairly big digression to what I was going to say, which was about the timing of Stokes and how long he might stay in the job. By the time he's ready to hand it over, it may well be that they're generation jumping and going to Brook anyway. Like, I always felt that Pope was being picked as vice captain because, and Australia have done this for generations well, not for generations, but there are examples across the generations of where they go, well, you're the next best batter and you're the right age profile and you fit in the right place in the team. Therefore, it would be great if you matured into the captain we would like you to be. Thus, you're vice captain. The best example, Smith in recent times, right? Who never really flourished as captain. He's been far better as a senior pro than he was as the Australian full-time Test captain. And the best example of that was how things went off the rails in South Africa in 2018 when he was completely knackered and other times around that. And we know what happened with sandpaper. But it wasn't just sandpaper, I guess is my point. He was teetering on the edge for a time there, and there were other examples across the 2.5 years he was in the job. And yeah, I ponder that if Stokes goes through, and the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Australian Test schedules come out this week for the next 7 years. It takes us all the way through to the end of this broadcast cycle with the television and radio agreements being inked in the last 9 months. We know that there's going to be the Ashes series in Australia in 25-26. There's also the Sesquicentenary Test match in the March of 27. Might that be the sort of thing that Ben Stokes says, oh, I wouldn't mind a bit of that? That's a little bit of history for me here. It's a long way to go. 2.5 years at least away from that line. But if Stokes gets to there, are we thinking more that Brooke might end up the next captain anyway, and Pope ends up in that in-betweeny kind of bit? I suppose my point is he's got an audition here for 3 Test matches. He's going to want to make the most of it. Otherwise, it could be that events overtake the narrative or the course that we thought might have been set when they appointed Pope as vice captain a year ago.
Well, first on that, I don't suppose it's going to be the last time that Stokes is injured between now and 2027 because
true, but he did play 20. But he did play 22 in a row, right?
Yeah,
since he became full-time captain.
He did, but he didn't bowl for quite a bit of those, true. And he managed his bowling loads in between, and had a really terrible knee injury, which he was managing and grimacing and being very pained. So I can see that there'll be occasions in which Pope or someone will be asked to step in and deputise. But the other part of that is I suspect, especially the way Stokes is devoting himself to this role, that, obviously the away Ashes for England in 25-6 is a massive focus. And that's why, for example, well-trodden ground, Jimmy Anderson going and looking to other bowlers and planning for that in advance. But also I suspect he would like to do back-to-backs and win at home. People like to stop at home. And in 2026, I don't know for sure, but 2026, because it'll be an even-numbered year, will probably be a bit like this even-numbered year, not a particularly exciting one. I think people forget a lot of the time when they go, oh, what a boring-looking summer it is for cricket in England, because we've got the West Indies and Sri Lanka, which is hugely disrespectful for 2 very interesting teams who come with very interesting players, incidentally. But I understand where the sentiment comes from. But actually, it's been something that's happened a lot of late, that India and Australia play in odd-numbered years. And the reason for that is there are no football tournaments, there are no Olympics. This gives an awful lot more space for cricket to breathe. And so you put your marquee series in at that time. And I can imagine that Stokes would want to go out in England on a high. And why shouldn't he want to do that with an Ashes series in England that, it's all very well saying Australia hasn't won in England for X number of years, but actually England haven't beaten Australia for a little while at home either, because they keep on drawing these bloody series. So it would be a kind of way, it'd be like him sort of captaining 3 series. And if he managed to get over the line against Australia in Australia, which I still think is highly unlikely, it'd be kind of like best of 3. Yeah. Try and win it at home and be done,
Well, it kind of bolsters the point I was making before then. In that scenario, he would still be leading in the March of 2027.
Absolutely, in 27,
Test match.
Just to back over
that and to give a bit of detail for those that missed the release during the week. So this is the 150th anniversary of the first test in 1877, and 50 years on from that wonderful week at the MCG where we have the footage, and every single test player who ever played for England or Australia was invited to Melbourne that week. When we interviewed David Frith on calling the shots, he explained to us that it was his 40th birthday that week, speaking of 40ths, and that was the kind of the week of his life as everyone came to town. So there's going to be a lot on there. It's going to be of enormous interest to people who care about the history of the game like you and me and so many of our listeners. Yeah, it'll be an incentive for players. You mentioned Stokes, I think of Smith as well, the relationship that Smith's enjoyed against England well, all the way back. He made his debut in England in 2010, played test matches against England in 2010 as well. If he reached 2027, it would be a mighty thing. Might that be a jump-off point for him? Again, it's a long way away, but these are the sort of things that I've been pondering. I do hope they invite.
So I was just going to say, have you pondered the other thing, which is, will they do a sesquicentenary in England? Because they did, of course, in England in 1980 when they had the centenary game, which was John Arlott's last, wasn't it?
They did. So that would be 2030 if we did that.
That'd be 2030. And if
cycle.
they did, should they not play it at the Oval? Because they foolishly played that one at Lords.
Correct.
When really, it's the anniversary of playing the first game in England at the Oval. And I wonder.
That's a very good point.
Sorry to interrupt your thought, but
no, it's a fair one. I hope that the ECB have taken a lead here from CA. A couple of things on the way through here. Please don't make it a day-night test match. I'm supportive of day-night test cricket. Just stick with the red ball in the day for this. It'll be a wonderful thing. And invite all the players. Do what they did in 77. Invite everyone to come along. Yeah, it'll cost a bit of money, but it'll be worth it. Think about the amount of money that would have been outlaid in 1977. It would have felt like a lot at the time, but it was worth it. And I hope they take a similar attitude 50 years on. And you can see a world where, I don't know, I'm sure Jimmy will be there. Maybe someone gets injured, that's Jimmy's return. 2027.
It's the old guys as well, though, isn't it? What was so absolutely gorgeously poignant, there were many things poignant about that centenary test in 77, but it was seeing like the really old guys being there. And I wonder who would be the oldest living test cricketer.
Well, Jack Ryder. I think Jack Ryder, I'm pretty sure, was the oldest at Melbourne in 77 and died a fortnight later. Would I be right in saying? It feels like a fortnight or three. It's like he held on for it, right? So, yeah, you're right. Who was born in, say, I don't know, who was born in the late 30s who might still be knocking about, maybe even longer. Maybe you could go back
maybe
to
1934, 35, something like that. Somebody who played it. And also, I would quite like it to be a celebration of Test cricket generally. Because what happened in that first test is it wasn't a test match and it became a test match, but it's where we get the jumping off point for this glorious game. I would love it if Tendulkar was there and Gavaskar and some of the guys that have moved test cricket on, the world record holders from different countries that have made their mark in test cricket. Because I know they may not want to come, and I know it's England, Australia, but there should be a celebration of Test cricket. All these people are gathering in Melbourne to play one game. It's kind of mad. It's not great for the climate, but we do understand why it's happening, and it's because it's a celebration of the greatest game that humankind has ever devised. So it'd be good to have some of the other stars there as well, I think.